morning, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Parenting Webinar Series. Our conversation on the previous webinars that we've had has been focused on role of parents in earlier and child behavior. In today's conversation, we will discuss the importance of nutrition in the first 1,000 days of life, which is also referred to as the critical window of opportunity. Our aim in today's session is that everybody who has joined in for the conversation would gain a better understanding of the importance of first 1,000 days, find out the connection between nutrition and brain development, and explore if eating habits in early years can determine the lifestyle that each of these children will have as an adult. Only last week, I was reading a report by WHO, and it is astonishing that the importance of this subject has been grossly underestimated. Now, to put things in a little bit of a perspective, what WHO has been stating is that the world obesity has tripled since 1975. And there are 39 million children as of 2020 under the age of 5 who are overweight or obese. And what's more astonishing for me coming from India is that India is the second highest, India's got the second highest number of obese children worldwide, with the number being 14.4 million as of now and expected to go to 27 million by 2030. Thank you all for joining. My name is Rishu, and I'm the co-founder and CEO of NewsPert, an initiative by Tillid. I will be moderating the discussion today, and I'm really excited to have the panel of experts join me, Lucinda and Jan, who will be shedding light on this topic, given their experience, decades of experience, I would say, working with parents and young children. I will request the panelists to introduce themselves. Lucinda, may I start with you, please?
Hello, everybody. My name is Lucinda Miller. I'm the clinical lead of NatureDoc, which is based in the UK. We specialise in child and women's nutrition. I've written a couple of cookbooks, which are also kind of Bibles to childhood nutrition in the early years. We basically, in our clinic, we see a lot of kids with learning, behavioural, developmental problems, and also obviously weight management. And our focus is on helping families to be happier and healthier.
Thank you, Lucinda. Jan, over to you, please.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jan Dubiel. I'm an early childhood specialist. I've been in early years for over 30 years as a teacher, as a government advisor, as a writer, as a presenter. And I'm currently Director of Early Years for AISL Harrow International Schools and kindergartens based in Hong Kong. So I'm coming at this from a purely educational point of view, but this is a really, really interesting discussion and one very close to my heart. So we're really looking forward to hearing what Lucinda has to say.
Thank you. Thank you, Jan. So for everyone who has joined us, if you have any questions at any point, please feel free to pop them over on the chat, and we will pick them up at the end. As part of the conversation today, we would be structuring it into 3 parts. The first section that we will be dealing with is called the critical window of opportunity. So Jan, this is for you. It is often said that the critical window of opportunity for child's development is the first 1,000 days. What is it that happens in the first 1,000 days? Why is it called the critical window?
Well, the first 1,000 days is a really useful and interesting way of viewing very early childhood. And the 1,000 days starts from conception. I mean, that's important to say. And one of the underlying theories in that is to do with the human gestation period. So there is a theory that human gestation should be longer than 9 months. It should be somewhere between 12 and 18 months. But because of the size of the head, of the size of the human brain, human babies are born earlier than they should be, because otherwise it would provide difficulties at the moment of birth. Now, the reason that's important, because that reconceptualizes our view of very early childhood. If we think that those young, very, very young children should still be in the womb, that would actually kind of relate and change the way we think about that. So now the reason this is a really interesting discussion is because obviously one of the key elements of being in the womb is around the nutrition and those kinds of inputs that happen. So as children are born and as that continues, it's really important that we can still consider that to be part of that period. Now, obviously, that first 1,000 days, and that goes on to kind of very early childhood, is a critical period in terms of certainly neurological growth, physical growth, and so on. And clearly, the nutrition, what goes in, for want of a better expression, what goes in to support and enable that becomes critically vital. It's the biggest period of neurological growth in a lifetime, but birth or pre-birth or conception to two. So that's the broad concept of 1,000 days, and it's a very, very, very useful and useful way of viewing early childhood. And within that, if we pull out the huge thread of nutrition, it gives us a lot to think about in terms of how we support and enable that, and the impact that has on these moment by moment developments of very young children.
Thank you. That's quite interesting. I wasn't aware of it. When I have a 2-year-old, so I guess I've missed the window, but something to be remembered. Lucinda, as a clinical expert, you would have spoken to zillions of parents about this, but why is nutrition so important for brain development in the first 1,000 days? Lucinda, I think you're on mute.
Sorry, I got muted. So as Jan was saying, it's obviously very important. Nutrition is incredibly important. Up until a few years ago, I think a lot of people were very focused in on growth. So how tall a child was or how heavy a child was. And that's what the Red Book's all about, to be monitored. And obviously everyone does in different countries, but in the UK, it's the Red Book. And it was thought that if a child was within that percentile, somewhere within those percentiles, then they would be probably thriving. However, that information has been drilled down much deeper now, and it's thought that the nutrition, that the food that the mother eats during pregnancy is super important in terms of child development. So, for instance, iron levels. If a mother is anemic or very low in their iron levels during pregnancy, that can impact the brain of the child, the child going forward. And this is why it's important to encourage iron-rich foods from about 6 months old, because a child's iron stores will only last up until about that point. Also, another very interesting part of the research that's being gone into is things like the gut microbiome, which is the bacteria in your gut, which helps to wire your brain, your immune system, and your general sort of character, emotional resilience and so forth. And it's thought that nourishing the mother's gut will help to nourish the child's gut. So it really starts right from the beginning. So during that pregnancy. Now, obviously, some people think, oh my goodness, I had the most terrible morning sickness. I was highly stressed. I wasn't in an environment where I could nourish myself properly. What can I do? And actually, the most important thing is to realize that despite everything that we're saying today about the first 1,000 days, it's never too late to nourish a brain. Okay. And that a child's brain is still developing until their mid-20s. So there is always work that can be done on the child's brain and the nutrition later on, even if you're listening to this thinking, heck, my child hasn't even weaned onto solid food, or we've had problems with their feeding journey, or whatever it might be. It's really important to realize that. But essentially, if you think about it, the opportunity you have to nourish yourself and your child is through food. Yes, you've got oxygen, you've got hydration, you've got a healthy environment to live in and so forth, but actually the 3 to 5 times a day that you're eating will be the chance to feed your child with iron, choline, omega-3, zinc, all these incredibly important nutrients that help to build a healthy brain, immune system and gut. And all of those work together to enhance brain development and neurodevelopment. We're seeing more kids than ever before with neurodevelopmental, neurodiversity issues, whether it's autism, whether it's ADHD, dyslexia, dyspraxia, or speech delay, sensory processing, and so forth. And even though some people are saying it's because people are more aware and there are better diagnostics, yes, of course, that's fabulous that these kids are being identified earlier on and so forth, but the numbers are higher than ever before, regardless of that, by quite a large margin. So this is why there's a lot more research into brain development and nutrition right now.
Thank you. That's quite insightful. One of the points that you mentioned about was women being anemic. And a couple of weeks back, I read a report, a sustainability report, and apparently globally, all countries have been given a goal. And one of the goals is to, look into anemia, because 52% or 50 or 52%, if I remember the numbers right, women who are at the reproductive age have actually got anemia.
So anemia is a big thing. However, there is a big margin. So there's a blood marker that almost any, if you went to have any blood test, it would be checked. It's called ferritin, which is your iron stores. And in an adult, if it's over 12, then you are not anemic. So anything under 12, you are classified as anemic. However, for a menstruating woman, it ideally should be 27 or above. And actually, to feel well and energized and get enough oxygen pumping around the body and have a good immune system and so forth, it really needs to be about 70.
Wow.
And I would say that I don't know the figures, but almost everybody that we check, unless they have some kind of iron transport difference, because there are some genetics in there, would be below 30. So even if they're not marked anemic, it's important to work on iron levels. And the great thing is you can get iron from all sorts of foods, and not expensive foods either. So things like black beans and kidney beans and lentils and chickpeas, as well as meat and spinach and other sources. But it's really important, and it's one of my big things when weaning a baby is to get the iron-rich foods in super fast.
Right. Thank you. So with that, we would move to our next section, which is going to be a little bit of conversation on nutrition and brain. Jan, can you tell us a bit about what is the effect of nutrition on brain function, and what sort of a diet, if diet can have an impact on child's cognitive activities?
Excuse me. Yeah, again, it's really interesting to hear Lucinda's very clinical take on that, and I'm looking forward to response to this really as well. And one of the things I would say is that diet exists within an interaction or an interface with other things as well. So I think, we talked about obesity already. Part of that is also to do with exercise, and it's to do with kind of a perception of the physical body and so on. But certainly we're looking at, and again, there's a lot of research to say that the balance of chemicals and the balance of nutrition that comes into a child does have an impact on, and does have an influence on how cognition works. So we're looking at how that works in practice, and we're looking at how that can be sort of managed and so on. So one of the things I would say as an educator is that having an understanding of, Lucinda's talked about the importance of iron and the importance of different food groups, and having the importance of different experiences around different types of food and the balance of those food that interacts with experiences, a healthy lifestyle, the effective, a good pattern of sleep and so on, contributes in their sort of totality to effective and healthy brain development. So I think diet is critical, and I think there's the science behind that is immensely powerful. But I think we do need to see it in the context of the kinds of experiences that the children are getting alongside it.
Do you think that diet can have an impact on child's behavior, or a child being happy or irritated?
Absolutely. I think when we look at issues of challenging behaviour or children with low well-being, I think one of the elements we look at is diet and sleep and kind of healthy lifestyle and exercise and so on. So I think we need to be precise, as I'm sure Lucinda's going to be, about the specifics of that in terms of diet. But seeing it in the round, I think, is very much something that I would say in this point. And I also want to go back to actually reinforcing that point. It's never too late to have a healthy lifestyle. It's never too late to get the right diet. And again, I think the amateur, as an amateur nutritionist, and certainly reading research from that perspective, you can see that an effective diet and a healthy lifestyle, even later on in life, relatively speaking, as a child, can kind of ameliorate some of those things. So it's we've talked about the first 1,000 days as this period of time, which is really important, but it goes on. It goes on forever. The brain, as Lucinda said, the brain is always growing and developing into the mid-20s, and even into later life. We have a lot of evidence that brain cells are still reconnecting and processing different information and creating new synapses. So it doesn't stop at that point. I think the significance of the first 1,000 days is this is highly fertile optimum period, and as with all early years, if we get all those elements right in that point, it makes a difference later on. And it creates the strongest possible foundations on which, of course, you have to build. So understanding the elements of nutrition, I think, is really important in conjunction with many of the other things we've talked about in other webinars about the kind of experiences, the kind of parenting, the kind of relationships they have, things like language, emotion literacy, and so on. And they all combine, I think, around that to move towards, I think, what we aspire to.
Thank you. That takes me beautifully to my next question, Lucinda, which is for you. Given that we have been talking about the first 1,000 days, and like a parent like me who's perhaps just crossed the 1,000 days window, what happens if we don't get it right? Are there any short-term or long-term impacts that we should be mindful of?
As I said earlier, and Jan said, is you can always catch up.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're sitting there going, gosh, actually, I've given quite a lot of packaged processed foods rather than homemade foods, then that, just little changes like swapping breakfast or swapping the snack after school can make a massive difference, and just switching things up. So one of the reasons why we need to talk more about nutrition these days than ever before is because our food culture globally has changed dramatically in the last years. So, a lot of people say, well, we're all right, weren't we? And, I know as a child, I did eat some processed foods. And, whether it was Angel Delight, which is a pudding that we have over in the UK, or jellies or whatever. But basically, our shopping trolleys historically were mainly ingredients. So meat, fish, eggs, flour, sugar, vegetables, fruit, etc., nuts. And nowadays, a lot of our shopping trolleys are now full of food that's been made by someone else. It's convenience. And it could be, a pasta sauce. It could be a packet of biscuits. It could be some crisps. It could be pesto. It could be some pasta, but it's made by someone else. And in quite a lot of cases, that's okay. It's convenient to have pasta made by someone else. It's a bit of a faff to make yourself, for instance. Not many people would do that on a daily basis. However, and there are some brands who are brilliant, and they make really natural pasta sauces with onions, tomatoes, celery, etc. But a lot of them are not. And what is happening is a lot of added ingredients are going into those foods because they make them bulkier, they make them thicker, they make them shinier, they have a better shelf life. They have natural flavorings, or artificial flavorings that can make it taste nicer, make the brain go, wow, this tastes like a flavor bomb, rather than, you know, the tomato sauce you might make at home. So it's all being geared towards eating more. And it's become quite addictive. And so it's not our fault, but it's because our shopping trolleys are just fuller of those foods. So in the UK, when, you know, we were all being brought up, probably our parents' shopping trolleys were 15-20% maybe processed foods. It's now at least 50-52%, unless someone's incredibly conscientious with what they buy and the ingredients they choose. But a lot of shopping trolleys are 85-90% processed foods now, maybe with the occasional banana or a few berries chucked in for good luck. But and this culture has meant that the food now is not nearly as nutritious as it used to be. So a lot of the food is made from cheap ingredients that then, as I said, have had these added ingredients to make them taste nice, have the right consistency and so forth, shelf life. But they don't necessarily contain the iron, the zinc, the omega-3, the calcium, the important things that help children grow. And when, you know, parents are busy, they're both working, juggling multiple, you know, looking after parents and jobs and so forth. It's really hard, and it's very easy to go towards convenience. And there's a lot of pointy fingers at things like sugary drinks and so forth. And I know that some families are, you know, it's become part of their day-to-day thing is to give their kids fizzy drinks and so forth. But a lot of families don't do that. I would say most of the families we see, it's not like that. It's more the kind of breakfast cereals, you know, apple juice, maybe going from whole milk to plant-based milks because they perceive them as healthier. But a lot of these foods have become more and more processed and more things that people just open up a packet and have. And this is why obesity and all the other issues with childhood have just dramatically changed, because home cooked food is less there. And, you know, like pouches, you know, baby food right from the start. Now, if you were to make an apple puree, say, when a baby's 6 months old, you're going to peel the apple, you're going to cook it. And each time you give them it to them, it's going to have a slightly different taste, slightly different texture. You know, it might be a little bit different heat even, or, you know, so it's been in the fridge for a bit longer. So it's all going to be slightly different. When you buy a pouch, that apple puree is going to be exactly the same every single time they have it. Same consistency, same flavor. It's, you know, the same room temperature essentially. So it doesn't change very much. And this can set up in a child's mind sameness. And a lot of people saying, why is my child fussy? Why is my child unable to have a broader diet? Why are they so selective? Because right from the start, they've had the same food every single day. And a lot of the pouches are very sweet as well. I do have a friend who works with brands who take baby brands to Asia. Mm-hmm. And they found that some of the healthier pouches that we would think would be really good for children to have been rejected because they're not sweet enough, because we're so used to these pouches being super sweet. So there is one very big brand in the UK, obviously no names, and they have a chicken and broccoli pouch, which is incredibly popular amongst parents because they think, great, you know, protein, greens. It's something like 83% apple. Wow. With a smidgen of chicken and a smidgen of broccoli. So of course that child's going to absolutely love it because it's essentially a pudding. Mm-hmm. And so there's a lot of things going on where it's not intended, it's convenience, it's easy, but actually that food doesn't contain very much protein or iron. It's mainly sugar, and it's setting up these taste buds for a more sugary. And then of course the kids reject the healthier food at breakfast going forward, like the eggs or whatever. They want their sweet cereals, they want their sweet. So you can see where it all starts right from those beginning habits. So that's why I wrote I Can't Believe It's Baby Food, because I wanted to educate the parents right from the get-go when they first start weaning their baby on solid foods to do their best. And no one does it 100% of the time. Pouch is incredibly convenient when you're out and about or going to stay in a hotel or whatever it might be. But to generally cook from scratch and to set up those habits, because then the children will consume more nutritious foods that are going to feed their brain.
Right. So you briefly touched on obesity, and I'm going to stick on for a bit over here. So I had received an email some time back. It was from Kids Brain Summit, and what it said was that by 2030, there is a prediction that 80% of the global children population are going to have developmental issues. And some of the reasons that they had stated was, like, one thing that you mentioned, busy lifestyle of parents, not having enough time, and of course the food that comes into play. So can deficiencies or malnutrition lead to long-term dysfunction, functionalities, or is there a connection between food and childhood ailments?
So we've touched on iron, and as I said, iron helps to pump oxygen around the body and the brain. So, and as you're going to have brain fog if you're not getting enough oxygen around the brain. So that it's one of the reasons why exercise is so important, because of course you're going to get oxygen around to the brain. I want to talk about omega-3, which is an incredibly important brain nutrient. And there are think tanks and research units, both at Oxford University, Imperial College and so forth, for several years, looking at the importance of consuming omega-3 rich foods prior to conception, during pregnancy, and during those first 1,000 days, essentially up until their second birthday and beyond. And omega-3 generally comes from oily fish, so things like salmon, mackerel and so forth, sardines, and also some seafood like prawns. And it's something, obviously, so you've got to be a little bit careful because of mercury toxicity in tuna, and obviously you're not meant to have seafood when you're pregnant because of risk of food poisoning and so forth. So there's, it's hard to get it right. But it's thought that the DHA, which is a very important part of that omega-3, is important for both eye development, and if you think about tracking, reading, and so forth, but it's also important for speech and language. It's also important for emotional and self-regulation. So a lot of the kids that have neurodevelopmental issues find it very hard to regulate themselves. So that could be emotional regulation, or they interrupt, like the ADHD kids, or they find it very difficult to behave, to sit still, just to do the sort of basic things that help them to be able to access education. And it doesn't always boil down to omega-3, but omega-3 is super important. And that's why we encourage a lot of oily fish foods, and it could be fish cakes, it could be kedgeree, it could be it's just a steamed salmon steak or whatever. And if someone's vegetarian, which a lot of people are, or vegan or plant-based or whatever, then you can get it from walnuts, flax seeds, chia seeds, hemp seeds, etc. But only a maximum of about 10% of those plant-based omegas will be able to be metabolized efficiently to turn into the brain food. So even though you might in your blood have enough omega-3, if it was tested, it may not be the right type, the DHA, which is so important for the eye and brain development. So I do encourage kids to take a omega-3 supplement if they're not consuming fish regularly. You can get vegan omega-3 supplements, but it's quite difficult to get children's ones. At NatureDoc, we do stock them, and we have an online shop, so we do have some, but as I said, it's super hard to get. But it's one of the key nutrients that is so important for the brain, and it's often something that is not given because of expense, accessibility, religious restrictions, etc. And I think it also dials down inflammation in the body. One of the reasons why children become obese or overweight is because their body's inflamed. And and it's not able to regulate properly. So the omega-3 is very important for that. So omega-3 feeds the gut, the immune system, and the brain. So again, a lot of kids have allergies these days. You know, we've been through the whole COVID pandemic where, you know, immunity has been compromised by, we've noticed kids with more compromised immune systems. And very often it can boil down to things like low iron, low omega-3 and so forth, low vitamin D. So even though people might be living in sunny countries, they're often covered up or wearing sun cream or inside, you know, learning at school rather than being outside. And so vitamin D is also a super important nutrient that you get from the sunshine, but you can also get from fatty fish, from eggs, some milks, etc. And important again for those, you know, for child development overall. And as I said, it's really interesting. Recent research, well, over the last 20, 30 years or so, have found that we have immune cells in our brains. So if our immune system isn't working well in the body, then it can affect the brain too. And I think everyone's experienced that brain fog when they've had a virus. And imagine if that continues afterwards. Mm-hmm. So I do think that very often the children that we often see that have some kind of learning, behaviour, developmental delay of sorts, often had poor immunity as a child, whether it's lots of antibiotics due to ear infections or gastric bugs or something, or that lots of food intolerances or allergies, you know, their nutrition was just a little bit skewed or their immune system was a bit skewed. So there's this interaction between the immune system, the gut and the brain, which is so key to get right. And things that can really help, as I said, are food, fresh air, exercise, hydration, and good sleep.
Oh, that's good. That's really insightful. I was going to ask you, but you answered my question, because we are pretty much vegetarians and my daughter doesn't really take fish at all. We tried, she didn't like it. So what were the...
I know a lot don't like it. And I found that's the other thing, is it's too fishy.
Yeah.
We do stock, it's a brand which I found which is very good. It's by Nordic Naturals. Mm-hmm. And it's called Veg DHA. And it's a vegetarian marine algae form of omega-3 that's easy drops that can be given. It seems to be the most child-friendly version. If a child isn't eating fish, can't eat fish or whatever, but needs that omega-3. And then I would add things like hulled hemp seeds, chia seeds, flax seeds, and so forth to porridge in the morning, or to make little energy balls, maybe for snacks after school or whatever, or after nursery, just to boost that up in the best way you can.
Thank you. That's really useful. So we'll move on to the final section of our discussion today, which is the childhood diet and its effect on adulthood. And there is a recent report which has been published by Narayana Health in India that says that 2 out of 3 children will remain to be obese as adults. And India specifically is projected to become the diabetes capital in the world. And that's definitely not very promising. So Jan, in your parenting course, you've mentioned that eating habits in earlier determine the lifestyle of a child as an adult. Is that really true?
Well, yes, and again, it's really interesting to hear what Lucinda's saying, and in my mind, I'm seeing this quite an interesting synergy between the role of diet and nutrition and how we structure a child's understanding of life, and how we create those effective habits. And so, for instance, I was thinking when Lucinda was talking about processed foods, and how that's changed over the years, and how actually making foods from scratch is becoming more of a rarity. And actually, there's in the course that we've produced, we talk about food preparation as a really good activity, as a really important activity. I mean, there's the nutrition element to it as well, which is obviously really strong, but it's also food and nutrition is very much part of the social and cultural landscape that children live in. And the more we expose them to those different kinds of experiences, I think the more we almost subliminally feed in those a healthier approach to food. So the example that Lucinda gave about the sameness of food and how that creates these kind of closed off taste buds around the food that children experience. If we make food together, as Lucinda said, if we make food together, we create it together, that is going to be different, that is going to be more diverse. And if we do that in very early childhood, as with everything else that certainly I believe, or I have come to believe as an educator, we set firm foundations on which that can then be built. And I think what's been really interesting about this discussion is being really explicit about the foods, the type of foods, going right down to the clinicals of, you know, omega-3 and iron and so on, and being really aware of that, being really informed and educated about the specifics of that and the impact that has on, you know, you think about things like concentration, you think about things like self-regulation, concentration. Those, you know, absolutely, those are fundamental, absolute behaviours you require in order to be successful, in order to engage with the learning process, in order to process information, recall information, and so on. So the more we can use the role of nutrition and diet to support that, and the more we understand it, and the more we understand the benefits of it, I think the more we can support that. But my kind of feeling here is it ties in really closely to the kind of more holistic picture of child development and how we support that as parents. And actually those experiences we give them help them to create a, you know, a perception of food and a perception of food preparation as part of the normal process. And, you know, that goes into meals. Meals are social and cultural events. And I think the more we understand that, I think the more we lay more solid, more potentially healthy foundations for children moving forward.
How can parents ensure that you know, children adopt healthy eating regime? Because obviously it is to do with the kind of food that's been offered to kids, right? So like, you know, you mentioned that it's a social event. So is it more like the parents need to eat healthy so that the kids eat healthy? Is that how it goes?
Well, I'm afraid that you know, that is going to be part of it, and they will have to model trying new foods and modeling and trying new range of foods. So that is part of it. I mean, I believe really strongly in the role of kind of family meal times. That sounds terribly traditional, but, you know, collective meal experiences, because they're not just about the food, although we acknowledge that's really important. It's about the protocols of interaction and the protocols of enculturation. It's how you learn to see people discussing things or trying new things out, all those multitude of behaviors that happen. So yes, I think that is part of that. And I think, again, one of Lucinda's points is about the variety of food very early on. And certainly I remember reading Lise Elliott's book about early childhood development, and she was talking about the importance of having spicy foods and garlicky foods when you're breastfeeding, because that transmits into the child, and they then build up a memory of that food, even if it's you know, via the milk. And again, that sets up the potentiality of them being used to those kinds of foods. One of my mum's stories mum used to tell about me was she had a really spicy chili and she breastfed me, and I really screamed and cried, and she could see that was, you know, had gone into my system. I really like spicy foods now, so it obviously worked apart from the initial reaction. But I think we mustn't underestimate that period of development, and also the prenatal period, because the connection there, and again, I'm sure Lucinda will have a lot more evidence than, but the connection there between what the mother eats and what the mother drinks and all those kinds of things that feed directly into the child are highly significant. And the more aware we are of these kind of, I think, what we used to call superfoods like omega-3 and iron and so on, and the importance they play in building brains, I think the more we can ensure that those foundations are as strong as possible.
I mean, I remember when Chiara was weaning, we would give her pureed food because that is what we were advised. And she would just reject it because she would see a different sort of food on in my plate, and she'd like she would just want to snatch what I'm having. So I kept wondering that, is it that I need to have purer food? And it really doesn't taste that great, right? Because you're advised not to add any sugar, not to add any salt. So, I mean, keeping those things aside, we did land up giving her a lot of what we would eat. And of course, we had to change our eating habits as well, like you've been saying, Jan, because, you know, of course, there's only so much spice that a child can have. So we had to reduce our spice levels significantly. And my husband complains till date that, you know, what's happened to all the spicy food at home?
Yes, yeah. No, and it's, you know, I've talked before about the kind of biological imperative. Children are programmed to copy, they're programmed to emulate the adults around them. So each meal time and each time we eat, we are giving very powerful signals which children are absolutely picking up on in terms of the types of food we eat and the way we respond to it. So yeah, there's no, I'm afraid there's no escape from that. You will have to eat healthily, but you know, that isn't a bad thing in the end, is it?
Yeah. I'll go on to my final question before we move on to the questions from the audience. Lucinda, this is for you. As a practitioner, can you give some practical advice to our audience on what is it that they can do at different stages, like, you know, before, during the pregnancy period, then 0 to 6 months or 6 to 12 months? You know, what is it that they can do at each of these stages?
I think it's important to realize that actually there's no difference, particularly in the stages. And I think it's adopting habits, and that could be slow changes. It doesn't need to be overnight, but slow changes, positive changes towards eating, having a healthier cultural environment at home. So whether that is, instead of buying a sweet cereal, is to maybe make a porridge or some scrambled eggs at breakfast, to maybe make some soup or have a salad, or, you know, or just a simple, I know, pasta, vegetables and chicken, or whatever it might be at lunch. And, you know, it's just trying to sort of cut from scratch slowly, making changes. And I think the more you eat at meal times, so the more you have 3 really good meals a day, the less likely you're going to be to snack. And it's the snacks that are the things that are driving childhood obesity and adult obesity. Because those snacks are usually, unless you've made it yourself, not going to be rich in, you know, the proteins, the irons, the omega-3s and all zincs and all the important things that actually satiate you and make you feel well. So you're always going to be craving more. So I think it's all about getting 3 really good meals in a day, and then just watching that you will be eating less snacks. And if you are choosing snacks, try and, as I said, have some fruits, some nut butters, some energy balls, whatever, you know, something, or flapjack, or something that's a bit more nutritious than a packet of crisps. And, you know, with young children, I think they're often encouraged to have snacks. And the rice cakes and these corn puffs and things like that, they're not nutritious at all. You know, they're fine, they're easy when you're out and about and you've got at the playground or whatever, and they suddenly need food, but to try and pair it up with other things, or to try and bring your own snacks.
I think that's really interesting. I think that the snack issue is a massive one, because it's it kind of permeates, certainly our schools in China. That's, you know, it's interesting considering what you just said about obesity. There's a real feature that children almost have to be fed constantly, but that is a learnt behaviour, and it is very, very cultural.
Well, a lot of it's to do with blood sugar regulation. So one of the reasons why children get hangry, why they suddenly, you know, they're constantly at the fridge or in the larder trying to, you know, find food, or nagging mum for snacks, is because they haven't had the right nutrition at the meal before to satiate them. So it's often a sign they've had too much carbohydrate and not enough healthy protein, not enough healthy fat to satiate them. And the trouble is, most snacks are very carbohydrate rich. So a typical day for a child that we see in the UK is that they will, these days, will have a bowl of cereal. Now that could be with cow's milk, it could be with plant-based milk. Often the milk's left at the bottom of the bowl. So really they've had the sweet cereal and maybe a glass of apple juice. So say that was oat milk rather than cow's milk, that would be carbohydrate with carbohydrate with carbohydrate. By 10:30, that's when it's break time and they're given an apple, piece of fruit or a biscuit. Again, carbohydrate, carbohydrate, carbohydrate. At lunchtime, you know, sometimes they might bring a packed lunch, sometimes they might be fed by the school, but knowing my children when they were little, you know, they would eat the bread and the pasta, but they probably wouldn't eat much else. So again, carbohydrate, carbohydrate, carbohydrate. So by the time you've picked them up from nursery or school at say 3:30 or whatever, they are lost in space. That is when they are the worst mood, they're overwrought, they're stressed out, their blood sugars on the floor because they've had virtually no protein or healthy fat to sustain them during the day. And of course, what do they want at that point? Oreos, crisps, biscuits, etc., rather than something healthy, because they're just, and you want to give them anything just to perk them up, because of course they will feel a bit better quite quickly when they've got a bit of sugar in them. But of course then they get scratchy and tired and overwrought, and homeworks or preps are really, really tough, and then you've got supper, and by that point they're often too overtired to eat. And that can turn into this cycle, which to begin with, the kids often look quite slim. You know, they're often not on the large side. So they kind of, but you just notice sort of hangry, difficult behavior. And it's usually around when puberty starts kicking in. So with girls, it's early as 9, 10 these days, and with boys a little bit later, but that's when the weight starts piling on. So it's basically the early years in terms of nutrition is setting up that metabolic health for later on. Yes, we are seeing bigger, younger kids, but it's often when they're a bit older. So you don't notice until it suddenly happens. You know, they go, oh, well, you know, they're maturing and, oh, gosh, they're getting bigger. And it just suddenly kicks in then. So that's usually not that we've got thousands and thousands and thousands of cases of type 2 diabetes, but if type 2 diabetes is going to kick in childhood, it's going to be around 12, 13 for girls anyway. So what we do with our nutrition guidelines is to work on getting a bit more protein and a bit more healthy fat in at breakfast, because that's a meal that you're in charge of, you're in control of. Whereas the snack at school and say lunch, it's slightly out of your control. Even if you put the perfect lunchbox together for your child, you don't know if they're actually going to eat it or not. You know, it could fall on the floor, someone could knock water into it. You know, they might not like the look of that sandwich because it's got something funny. You know, you can do, you know what kids are like. So really that's why it's getting breakfast right. And then it's the after school snack to be, again, a balanced snack that's got some protein, fat, as well as carbohydrate in there. And then that will tide them over. And then you'll find that supper works better, and then they'll sleep better, and then they'll wake up in a better mood the next day. And then they will be less craving the sugary stuff in the morning. They'll be happier to have the more, say, savory based breakfast or whatever, or healthier breakfast. So, and it happens really quickly. That's what's exciting. It's not one of those things that takes months and months and months. I've had literally families turn around in a day, in 2 days, by just giving them a savoury breakfast or a very nutrient dense breakfast, where say porridge with nut butters, ground seeds, berries, etc. So it's a bit more than just the Cheerios or the, you know, whatever, the sugary cereal. So it can change quite dramatically, quite quickly. And once you see your child better balanced, less hangry, you'll know they've got better metabolic health, and you'll see their grades change, their mood, their friendships change, their creativity change, all those things. Just their whole demeanor will be in a better place just from getting blood sugar balancing. And what does eventual blood sugar balancing disbalance lead to? Obesity, type 2 diabetes, cardiac, metabolic syndromes, and also dementia, Alzheimer's. So the neurodegenerative stuff later on in life. So it's important to get those patterns in, and those, like, and if, you know, I've got 2 adult children now, so I've got 1 younger teen and then 2 who are sort of university age, and they generally still have a savoury breakfast. My son will have hummus and sourdough and things like that for breakfast, and he's 21. So that's really, really helping him. So his habits from when he was young is helping him now going forward as a young adult. And it's exciting to see, that he's not relying on the sweet cereals, even though he loves them and he will have them sometimes. So we're not about perfect either.
That's very interesting. So the question that I have for you, Lucinda, is, we have dealt about once the kid starts eating, but from conception till the mums are breastfeeding, there's no direct food intake that a child has. Can that impact the eating habits once the child starts eating, depending on, what the mum is eating?
So as Jan said, these flavor tastes are so important. The garlic study is fascinating, and that's in my book because it was just so important. And I'm really encouraged spices from weaning. But prior to weaning, so prior to that first 6 months, obviously mum's diet's super important, both for nourishing herself, nourishing the growing baby, nourishing her microbiome, her gut microbiome, because of course that is going to then, the balance of that's going to be passed through the birth method. More so if it's a natural birth than a cesarean birth, but still that's going to give the child this balanced bacteria. It's going to help with their immune system and their development. But equally, there's also feeding mode. Now, not, even though different countries do it differently, in the UK, the uptake of breastfeeding is incredibly low still. So a lot of babies are bottle fed right from the get-go. Breastfeeding, you have a lot more control over, what nutrients your baby is getting, because essentially what you eat will go into your breast milk. I think there's been this sort of idea that breast milk is constant and the same, and it doesn't matter what you eat. And actually it's a myth. Essentially, if anyone's ever pumped their breast milk, they will see that it's a different colour depending on what they've eaten, and so forth. It can be darker yellow, lighter yellow. It's if they're unwell, or well, it can change. And so breast milk changes quite rapidly depending on what mother's eating, and of course those nutrients are then going into the baby. So if you're breastfeeding, then you've got a lot more kind of ability to change your diet and to therefore change the nutrition going into your baby's diet. There isn't any iron in breast milk, or very, very little. So that's why the iron story is so important. So even, if a baby's being breastfed, they do need that, iron to be optimized. But obviously a lot of babies are formula fed, and there are benefits to that too in lots of ways. Sometimes they get more milk, they grow a bit better, they sleep a bit better. But also, they're getting certain amounts of iron, vitamin D and so forth in the formula. And they also now add prebiotics to help bolster the microbiome. But, no one's ever going to get perfect. And we're so not judgmental with the way the nutrition goes. But obviously, that formula is going to be very consistent, again, in flavour and, volume and smell and all those important things. So again, it is thought that potentially, and as I said, every child is different, and their character is different and so forth, is that if a baby, say, is cesarean, and then they are bottle fed, and then they are pouch fed, then that may not be a particularly good combination in terms of immune development, brain development, and also feeding choices going forward. They may end up becoming quite narrow in their food choices because everything's become quite consistent. And there is also a sort of thought that potentially that might also skew someone to more of a black and white brain, as in because they're not used to difference and change. These subtle changes are important. And rigidity is something that actually is a big challenge in education and in parenting when a child is unable to adapt. So I think adaptability is a very, very key child skill that we need for life. And again, that can be helped through nutrition. So there are these subtle things as well as the big things that I think it's important. There's a brilliant piece of research that I'll end on, and it's called Of Carrots and Curiosity. And essentially, the children that ate more fruit and veg when they're little become more creative, more curious, more adventurous. And I think that's what we want for our children, don't we? We want them to be happy, curious, adventurous, creative. So it's not just about academic ability and, growth and, their metabolic health. It's about their happiness and their ability to have a really full life. So that's what we aim for. And so, if you think about that, carrots and curiosity, so vegetables and the greater picture, it's really important.
Thank you. Very insightful, Lucinda. We'll move on to the Q&A quickly, given that we've got 5 minutes. The first question, I'm going to give it to you, Lucinda. I think it is more from a clinical perspective. How long is it recommended to have folic acid during pregnancy? There are divergent views on this. For example, one of the brands suggests it is taken throughout the term. However, NHS suggests that it is taken up to 12 months. Can you please advise on this?
Okay. So from a clinical perspective, we find that about 60% of people have a genetic variation, which means they can't synthesize synthetic folic acid well. And therefore, it is better to get it through diet or through a more natural form of folate called methyl tetrahydrofolate. Those guidelines are not, government guidelines yet, but it's something that which I suspect will happen. And a lot of large vitamin manufacturers have changed to this form because it's better synthesized. I think that it's crucial for the first 12 weeks in terms of neural defects. So that first trimester, it's key to have some form of folate. And it's a time when women are often nauseous, vomiting, and not necessarily drawn to the green leafy veg and the beans and the pulses and the eggs and all the folate-rich foods. So that is another reason why, is because they're often got morning sickness, and it's just not, their diet isn't going to be replete in those nutrients. After that, it's really a choice going forward. And I obviously encourage eating lots of green vegetables, eating lots of salads, eating lots of eggs, beans and pulses, because that's where you get the folate from. There are about at least 9 forms of natural folate our body needs to absorb, and actually folic acid in a synthetic form is not necessarily the best way. But what's interesting is we're finding that a lot of women who have postnatal depression or OCD and so forth, after anxiety and so forth, after the birth, are often low in folate, because it's a very, very key nutrient for turning on neural pathways. So whether it's through diet, whether it's through supplementation, I think it's important, if you know you're just not that kind of person who's not very good with the diet, or has been vomiting throughout your pregnancy, or has got a very high stress situation, maybe you've got triplets, maybe you've got, I don't know, you've been severely unwell, after, whatever it might be, you may want to take a supplement, but it's not absolutely essential if your diet is replete in folate.
Thank you. I think that kind of answers the second question that was there as well, which is how to increase iron for a 1-year-old who drinks a lot of milk, because you've kind of given tips throughout.
I can help with that a little bit more, actually. Milk and milk products can actually block the absorption of iron. And this is why it's advised that children or babies over 12 months reduce their milk intake to about 2 bottles of milk a day, rather than more. However, I know that doesn't always happen. And we see babies that still constantly feed through the night, 7, 10 feeds in the night. They're having a lot of feeds during the day, they're still depending on milk. And a lot of people do really worry about that. And that's where, the iron-rich foods are super important. And also iron-rich foods combined with vitamin C. So you might have a dal, you might have some lamb, you might have some apricots or spinach or something with iron, but also you need the vitamin C as well. So that could be some strawberries or a bit of orange or whatever afterwards in the meal to help absorption of iron. Yeah, I hope that's helpful. But I know that and that's where our clinic's all about. Our clinic's there to help parents navigate those wobbles, when, you know, their baby's not necessarily feeding as they wouldn't hope. You know, when they read the textbook, they go, well, my baby's not doing that. And you're thinking, okay, where do we go and why? And it's often because there's a food intolerance or a gastric issue or food, you know, deficiency or something going on that's sort of driving this sort of change in their feeding patterns.
Thank you. That's really insightful. I'm afraid we've got a couple of more questions that have come in, but we will attempt to answer them offline because we're running out of time now. So thank you, Jan and Lucinda. This has been a really insightful session, and thank you everybody else who joined in. If you have any other questions, please drop a note to us at info@tillit.com. And if you'd like to know about, you know, and anything more about Lucinda or Jan's course, we would be happy to help you there. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you. Bye.